on this was, I think it's a film that's safe to say all three of us have a warm place and it's our heart for it. So,
yeah. So the interesting thing with the Warriors, I think for anyone who's 40 plus is if you have any connection to the movie, there's probably some anecdotal or, thing that is connected to you. The funny thing for me and my family and families that I knew, Black families that we knew, is that it was always in the background in a very humorous way, pop culture wise. Like there was always references that just got shot out in the middle of something where like, uncle would yell out, "Can you dig it?" in a family reunion, and everyone would be like, "Ah," and just kind of keep it moving.
That's
like,
awesome.
And it would be like you see it perpetuated in like different Black culture media throughout. Like, there's moments in like the Martin, which was one of my favorite shows growing up. Like there are moments where he would just yell, "Can you dig it?" There's a moment in Dr. Dre's California Love where we all saw, and like when we saw it, we're like, yes, like, and that wasn't just my family, that was across the board. That was like everyone who had any connection to the Warriors saw that. It was like, yeah, baby, like this is about to be the shit. So, it's funny because like that unifying situation at that moment is very indicative of what the Warriors really was. And we know that I know that Greg's point coming up is kind of speaking to the colorful nature of it. It's also a very unifying thing that the Warriors kind of were. Like if you pick apart the gangs and you look at it from the lens of right now, it's woefully stereotypical and like to the point of like that's completely offensive. However, if you look at it from like the lens of like if you're in the 50s and you're now in the 70s and you're looking into the sort of massive multicultural, because we can't forget, no matter how progressive the movie is, it's written by a white guy and it was directed and produced by white men. So like their version of what was kind of colorful in the movie, really it was from their lens, and they're also of the time like 40s, 50s, 60s. So, they're coming from an earlier time. So that it adds to the colorful nature of the Warriors. And I think the funny part is when it gets flipped on its head 4 or 5 decades later, it's part of the reason why it's so unifying across so many different cultures. It's because it's literally what the New York City was at that time. It was toss everything in, good, bad, or indifferent, and then you come out with this graffiti of a mess, and then it's kind of like, well, we all see this art. It's Jackson Pollock, basically, so we're just going to walk away and call it a day and hope for the best. But all that said, the Warriors for me is hilarious because, as Josh pointed out, you're watching a movie. You never, ever have ever seen in any moment a situation where you have a lead character or one of the main characters and he's just killed and everyone just keeps moving. Everyone just literally, there's no conversation. There's no thought.
True.
No one in the movie moving forward. It was like, hey, where's Fox? Like, it was just basically like, we're all just going to act like dude wasn't really there and keep it moving.
I'll interject quickly. The movie Psycho was the first to kill off its main character, but that's still a major plot point because Janet Leigh dies, but then her sister comes looking for her. So, it's still important to moving the story along.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, to be clear, I'm not saying that no movie has ever killed their lead character early in the movie. What I'm saying is to do it in a way as if there was no such thing as this character. That's the funny part. Like, it was almost like they did a Thanos snap in the movie. Like, it was like, wait, huh? No one knows what you're talking about. There's no Fox. There's never been a Fox. Like, dude, he was literally like your number 2. Like, he was your scout. He's the guy who kind of got you halfway to the movie. Like, how did this even happen?
He did.
So, like, and then another thing that Josh just pointed out, like, how this movie is very funny, and since we probably won't see something like this ever happen again, no matter what the parallel, is the fact that how they did it in the background in a way that it was like literally no sort of press around it whatsoever. It was kind of like, we just cut this actor. He's completely removed from this movie. He has zero rights or anything connection to this movie, and no one's going to say shit. And everyone went with it. Everyone's like, yeah, all right, cool. Yeah. Like, what? Like, that's the funniest thing. It's like, it happened in the movie. It happened in real life. It's as if this guy literally in real life and in the character did not exist whatsoever. He was just gone. It's mind blowing. You'll never see it again.
Greg, you were thinking about this. I know, like I said earlier, I've known you both for quite a while. But I'm sure we dropped references early on in our friendship, which of course solidified our friendship without doubt.
It happens.
But you had some thoughts on the cultural impact of this film and what it meant to you growing up and how it still kind of relates to today.
It touches on, I mean, my background with it was, I think it was similar to yours. It was like, I heard about it before I saw it, because I heard about it so much that I felt like I had seen it. But then when I was in high school, it was like, gosh, I've never actually sat through from beginning to end. And so by then I was like, totally into it was the 90s. It was all about cinema and film again. So I was like, I have to sit through it. And it was perfect for the era because, like you touched on, it was, Hollywood was changing. Actors were getting ugly. You had Dustin Hoffman, you had Gene Hackman, it's a long way from, Montgomery Clift, you know what I mean? Like, things were really changing.
Or Brad Pitt and George Clooney.
Oh, you're right.
Right.
Like that would be another cycle. Elizabeth Taylor got fat for roles. Like it was Hollywood was changing. So if you're going to take, the new Hollywood and wrap it up with what was happening, you had the unbelievably dark and gritty Godfather. You had the space opera Star Wars,
of course,
and then for you to have this movie that just reflected something that old Hollywood would never touch. I mean, James McCagney, I'm sorry, he was never scary as a gangster. He just never was. Like, this was the first foray into actually looking at these gangs and the gritty survivalist predatory mentality that they have. Like, this had not been touched. And yeah, it's campy by our view, but at that time, no. Like, this was real surviving haves versus the have-nots in New York. Because before this, don't forget, it was West Side Story. Right? It was the fucking Jets, Like, before that, it was West Side Story. It's like, now you had that, as reflected with The Godfather and other movies that were coming out at the time, Marathon Man, Post Peckinpah, those movies. And this kind of fell like right into that era. And so for me, it was, the counterculture of New York. I loved it. Like, there was a trans counterculture, there was a punk counterculture, and the gang counterculture was definitely part of that. And it wasn't so much evil at the time. I mean, now we see it from more of its negatives, but at the time, it was recreational. Like, it was a way for young men who had very few options to solidify their identities. Because don't forget, we're not talking really about the mafia.
No.
We're not talking about the Mexican cartels. Like, we're talking about a group of young guys, strength in numbers, self-esteem in numbers.
A fraternity, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. A fraternity more than, a criminal empire, And for me, that's something that's absolutely constant, And so even though to tie it into today, even though the face of things have changed, you definitely still have your gangs. You've got your bros, your wokes, your Karens, your MAGAs. You've got, what I'm saying? I mean, like,
I'm sorry. I gotta just stop you. I'm just picturing just like this, like, wall of white women coming. Excuse me. All with
we
the
want
cut.
to speak to your manager.
You need the cut. I don't know what the symbol would be, but I can just see the rocker that says Karens across the top.
Karens? Why the fuck not?
Oh my God. And I feel so bad for a few Karens I do know who are actually wonderful people, as far as I can tell.
I mean, maybe, but they should change their name. But yeah, you had that, and it absolutely just that. These aren't necessarily criminal enterprises, but just like that, identity in numbers, and the survivalist mentality. We were talking about, this chick that just got tossed from the Mandalorian. Like there it is again, like just a sense of identity. And if you're going to be here, this is what you're going to believe, and you need that in order to assimilate into these gangs, and you needed to assimilate into these gangs, if you want to call them that today. It's the same mentality, just much better cinematography, I guess.
Certainly. I mean, it's interesting because it is so wrapped up in the style of the 70s, right? That once again, like kind of comes around, it kind of comes around and it doesn't, but to see someone wearing a leather vest with their gang colors on, but no shirt on underneath.
Right? Oh yeah.
And low waisted jeans with bell bottoms, but totally unironically, right? That was, that's what looked cool at the time.
And,
it wasn't.
And interestingly enough, that tied into, that was the style of the time, obviously. And my, still my perception of the city at that time. Again, for me, it was more about the countercultures. Like it was more about the countercultures than the billionaires and everything else. And that culture, you look at them and then you look at the trans subculture, for example, like in Harlem and Brooklyn, there was a real big like cross-dressing trans subculture. Oh yeah, they love the Warriors too.
Oh yeah.
They had fucking Cass with the leather vest, couple of feathers, and they were they fucking lit that up too.
Even the village people, even the village people.
The jean jackets too, like all of that was just perfect. And no one was more sub than the gay culture. Well, no one was more sub than the bondage culture, but that's for a different reason.
That's for yes.
Yeah, that's for a different reason. But all of that kind of turned into that fabulous mix at that time of a New York subculture, and that'll never happen again. That'll never happen. I don't want to hear about Twitter. It's not the same. All right, it's just not the same.
I think it'd be safe to say, it's nice to put a hash, nowadays that's it. Your subculture is the hashtag that's trending.
Yeah, done.
And what you put on it. But that's different from a time when you had to go out when you were out on your stoop and you would dress a certain way and you'd hang with certain people.
You lived it.
And some people, this was where they got to go to live that subculture.
It
from
was
small
the
town
only
America.
option you had.
Right. If you were gay, you went to two cities in the U.S., San Francisco or New York.
Yeah.
Right? In the Village in New York, or things like that, or certain other, or as you say, other many other subcultures. Not trying to down anybody or separate anyone, but I remember being young and in the 80s and going and walking through Greenwich Village, right? And it was like a shock for me as this lily white kid from the suburbs, seeing a bunch of openly gay men, right? Yeah. And it was like, this is like, wait, this exists, this happens, and I was, much with the movie. I think that's part of what the movie brings out, was this sort of like wide-eyed awakening and trying to gain some new understanding, a fascination, a touch of fear, because, I'm human. I admit to that, right? You try, you have those moments of being scared of the other. I'd like to think I've grown enough and been mature enough to push through that and try and start to learn. And use, films like this. It's interesting that you bring up the subculture aspect of it, because James Remire, who's probably one of the more famous actors, he's an actor whom most people recognize but don't know his name. He was famous. He got probably most famous being the dad on Dexter.
Okay. Man, that hurts, man. That 48 hours? Come on.
Yeah, he's in 48 Hours too. No, he's the bad guy in 48 Hours. I just don't know if that made him the household name that Dexter.
Damn that house. That house don't matter. That house is not worth whatever the material they made it from.
He's a great actor. He's one of those actors that it's great to watch. He's got a particular.
By the way, Black Lightning. Can I get some respect? Damn.
Black Lightning happened.
That absolutely.
No, he's in it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But he is also in the film in the same genre, in the same 70s era and subculture genre, which is Cruisin', with Al Pacino. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but it's just interesting because he also got to play a subculture part of that. He is gay in that movie. which is examining, as you say, more subcultures in New York and how we're looking at things and what's happening there. So you do have, as you say,